My name is Mary Sanders. I'm 33 years old. And this is the story of how I gave everything to a dream, only to watch my family hand it all to someone else. It was a Tuesday when the air changed. Not outside, not the weather. Inside. In the building where I had given nearly a decade of my life, 1 hour at a time. The hallway smelled like printer ink and eucalyptus diffuser oil. A vase of fresh peonies sat where last week's budget charts used to be. I blinked, confused, as I watched my mother adjust pillows on the gray couch in the third-floor conference room. She looked up with that familiar, practiced smile that always landed somewhere between love and strategy. She'll be using this room a few times a week. Your father thought the communications team needed a more creative space. I furrowed my brow. She who? Savannah, she said, like it was obvious. My heart sank through the soles of my shoes. Savannah? My sister who hadn't stepped foot inside this building in over 4 years? The same sister who'd ghosted the family business to find herself in Europe, documenting art shows and playing cello in alley cafes? Now she was returning. Not just for a visit, but to be in the building. In this room. In my space. I barely remember getting to my office. I shut the door and stared at my desk, numb. A desk covered in stacked invoices, pending permits, subcontractor complaints, and a mug of coffee I'd reheated 3 times already. A desk that didn't care how I felt. Because deadlines didn't pause for family drama. But this wasn't drama. This was betrayal disguised as design. When Savannah walked into my office a few hours later, her heels made a sound like authority, or maybe mockery. I looked up. She beamed, arms open like we were childhood best friends. Mary. I've missed you. I stood, slowly. Didn't realize you were coming back. Her eyes sparkled, always too bright for any real depth. It's not forever. Dad just thought I could help with branding and emotional messaging. You know, modernizing Sanders Build Company. My jaw clenched. Emotional messaging? This was a construction firm. We built things that didn't fall. Concrete. Steel. Integrity. She chirped on about her vision while I quietly returned to my work, trying not to let the sound of her laugh scrape my last nerve raw. By the end of the week, I knew something was wrong. Strategy meetings I'd led for 5 years were suddenly rescheduled. Files I needed were being reorganized. Eleanor, my dad's long-trusted assistant, couldn't look me in the eye. When I checked the internal calendar, my name was missing from meetings I had created. Projects I had spearheaded. I asked Dad directly. Just trying something different, he said. Savannah brings a creative lens. Clients want more than logistics now, they want a story. A story? I echoed, choking back the heat rising in my throat. You're overwhelmed, he continued. We're just spreading things out. But it wasn't about balance. It was about replacement. And the lie, wrapped so neatly in soft reasoning, was worse than a direct attack. A week later, I walked into a meeting room I hadn't been invited to, just in time to hear Savannah presenting a rebrand called Sanders Build Co., a program to build emotion. No one looked up. No one made space. I stood there for 8 seconds, exactly 8, before I backed out of the room like a stranger in her own home. I thought it couldn't get worse. But betrayal doesn't knock. It waits in silence. I found the file on a Tuesday night. The basement was damp, and the motion sensor lights barely flickered on. I had gone looking for an old contract, one I'd written myself when we were renegotiating the Truman Ridge site. Instead, I found a folder labeled in thick marker, Confidential Internal Transfer Documents. At first, I didn't even recognize the signatures. Then it hit me. Roy T. Sanders and Eleanor G. Sanders, my parents, had signed over 75% of Sanders Build Company to Savannah J. Sanders. 6 months ago. Without telling me. While I was working nights, chasing permits, saving failed deals, they were giving her everything. There wasn't a single page with my name on it. No clause. No caveat. Just a clean, clinical removal. That folder weighed more than steel. It crushed 9 years of loyalty in under 3 minutes. I didn't tell anyone that night. I drove home in silence. I sat in my kitchen until the walls blurred. I held the letter my dad wrote me when I was 14, the one that said, "One day, you'll run this company. I believe in you." That letter used to be my anchor. That night, it felt like a joke. The next morning, I called my best friend from college, Margot, now a property law attorney. "They can do this?" I asked, my voice barely holding. "If they owned the shares?" "Technically, yes," she said. "But if there's anything in writing, old emails, messages, statements of intent, you could challenge it." I had those emails. Buried deep. I also had the audits. The profit margins. The timelines. I had evidence. But evidence doesn't matter if you don't fight. She asked, "Do you want to?" And I didn't answer. Not yet. Because it wasn't about revenge. Not yet. It was about deciding who I was without the company I had become. Would I crumble quietly? Or would I do what I always did? Build something from the ground up, but this time, for me. I didn't sleep the night I found the transfer documents. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, haunted not just by the betrayal, but by how quietly it had all been done. 6 months. For 6 whole months, I had pushed through back-to-back project launches, flown to DC to secure a tax credit for a green housing initiative, and stayed up 3 nights in a row when a vendor threatened to breach contract. I fought for the company like it was my child. Meanwhile, they were signing it away behind frosted glass doors. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just turned numb. Like concrete that had been poured and left to set without water. By Friday, I couldn't fake it anymore. I walked into the office, looked around, and everything felt foreign. The front desk receptionist, who once handed me my mail like clockwork, now gave me a nervous smile. The break room, once filled with workers reviewing punch lists, now had lavender oil diffusers and classical music playing softly. I walked straight to my office, sat down, and stared at my screen. My inbox was full, not with appreciation, not even updates, just the same draining chaos it always carried: complaints, revisions, budget alerts. Except now, every email felt like it was written in another language. At 10:47 a.m., a Slack message popped up from Eleanor. "Eleanor, hey Mary, would love a quick sync if you're free this afternoon. Just to align on your current role and future visibility." That was code. HR code. They wanted to know how long I'd let this happen before I reacted. I ignored it. Instead, I spent the rest of the afternoon digging. I opened every folder I had created. Project sheets. Budget tracking systems. Internal policy documents. The Employee Satisfaction Survey Initiative. My personal ledger of saved contracts and efficiency gains. By 6 p.m., I had assembled what looked like a legal arsenal, not stolen files, just evidence. Of my value. Of my irreplaceability. That night, I didn't go home. I drove to my parents' house. Not to yell. But to look them in the eye. Dinner was already cooking. My mother opened the door wearing her navy apron, the one she wore for holidays and big family events. The house smelled like rosemary and butter. For a moment, I felt 10 years old again. Safe. But then Savannah walked into view, holding a bowl of salad and wearing my old work blouse. The one I'd left at Mom's during an overnight audit last winter. My father sat at the head of the table like nothing was wrong, glasses perched low on his nose, reviewing something on his tablet. No one mentioned the folder. No one brought up the ownership transfer. I waited until we sat down. I didn't touch my food. I simply reached into my bag, placed the file gently on the table, and opened it to the notarized page. Dad, I said, voice steady. Would you mind reading this out loud? The clink of silverware stopped. Savannah froze. My mother paled. My father didn't move. Finally, he said, Mary, this isn't what you think. It's exactly what I think, I replied. My mother tried to step in, voice quivering. It was never about taking anything from you. We thought Savannah could bring something different. She can bring paintings. Ideas. Vision boards, I said, my voice sharpening. But she didn't build this company. Savannah raised her hands. I didn't know they signed over shares, Mary. I just said yes to helping out. I didn't ask for. You didn't say no either, I snapped. My father finally spoke. Enough. You're making this emotional. This is business. Savannah brings a softer touch. Clients connect with her. And I brought the company from a negative quarter to a $1.8 million surplus in 2 years, I fired back. But I guess numbers don't feel emotional enough. Mary, my mother pleaded, we didn't mean for it to come out like this. It didn't come out at all, I replied coldly. I discovered it. In a dusty file cabinet. Alone. I stood, picked up the file, and walked to the door. Where are you going? My father asked. To remember who I was before I begged for your approval, I said. And I left. The following morning, my phone lit up like a warning sign. Missed calls. Voicemails. Slack pings. Emails from contractors. Requests. Demands. Panic. Savannah, it turns out, didn't know how to handle a payroll crisis. Or a vendor dispute. Or the updated zoning laws that delayed Eastview by 3 weeks. The first person to call wasn't my dad. It was Maxwell Carter, our largest client and a partner who had trusted me with 5 projects in 3 years. I don't know what's going on, he said. But I want you to know, Mary, we work with you. Not the name. Not the logo. Not the branding. You. I stared out the window. Thank you, Maxwell. But I'm no longer part of Sanders' build company. There was a pause. Well, wherever you go, let us know. We follow people, not plaques. When I hung up, I didn't feel proud. I didn't feel victorious. I felt exhausted. But deep down, I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going back to beg. I was going to rebuild, with leverage. And this time, I'd own my blueprints. I didn't return to the office the next week. I didn't return texts. I let emails rot unopened. While the company flailed, I went silent. Not because I didn't care. But because silence speaks loudest when you've always been the one to clean up the mess. By Tuesday, my father showed up at my house. I saw his car from the window, the familiar black Lexus that had taken me to job sites as a kid, where I'd climb onto scaffold railings and memorize blueprint markings instead of coloring books. He knocked 3 times, each one heavier than the last. I opened the door. Didn't invite him in. We need to talk, he said, holding a disheveled folder of reports and printed emails like they could shield him from the truth. Do we? I asked. His eyes, once sharp and commanding, now looked tired. We're bleeding. Paula, Savannah, she's not ready for this. She's trying, but the clients don't trust her. The Westmore deal is falling apart. You need to come back. I leaned against the doorframe. You want me to come back as what? Employee of the month? Back up to the creative director? Or maybe as specialized support staff, like that proposal labeled me? He flinched. I built the backbone of that company, I continued. And you handed it off to someone who doesn't know the difference between margin and markup. It was never meant to be permanent. It was signed, Dad. Not drafted. Not discussed. Not even warned. Signed, sealed, notarized. 75%. He exhaled and rubbed his face, voice cracking. I made a mistake. No, I said. You made a choice. Don't insult me by calling it a mistake. He lowered the folder to his side. What do you want? Finally, the question that should have come 10 years ago. I crossed my arms. 40% equity. A permanent board seat. COO title, on contract. 3 weeks of vacation a year. And no more than 45 hours a week. His mouth twitched like I'd slapped him. You're talking like this is a merger. I raised a brow. You turned this into a stock exchange, Dad. I'm just adjusting to the economy. Silence. 2 days, I added. That's how long you have to consider. After that, you can let Savannah handle the next quarterly loss herself. And I closed the door. I didn't cry afterward. I brewed tea, sat on the couch, and stared at the steam curling from my mug. No boardrooms. No concrete specs. No weight of expectation pressing down on my chest. For once, it felt like oxygen. The next morning, my mother called. Your father's reached out to Harold Peterson, she said quietly. He wants a meeting. Private conference room. Stone and Bell, tomorrow at noon. Stone and Bell was where real estate moguls handled quiet settlements. It wasn't a family lawyer's office. It was a power broker's war room. The following day, I walked into the conference suite in a navy blazer and jeans, intentional. I wanted to look like myself, not someone in costume to impress the people who already underestimated me. Savannah sat on one end of the table, hair in a neat braid, looking like a shell of the girl who'd breezed into the company on a cloud of music and mood boards. My parents sat beside her. Harold sat at the head, opening the file folder. We've reviewed Mary's proposal, he began. 40% equity is a significant share, but not unearned. Based on documented contributions, including internal system overhauls and contract negotiations. He paused, sliding a copy of my compiled work portfolio forward. There's precedence for board-level consideration. Savannah glanced at it, then looked up at me. I didn't know everything you did. You didn't ask, I said flatly. Harold continued. If Savannah agrees to transfer 35% of her shares, she retains 40%. Mary holds 40. Parents keep 25. Shared board decisions moving forward. Savannah blinked. So I'm giving up control. No, I said gently but firmly. You're giving back what never should have been handed to you. She was quiet for a while, then nodded. I don't want to lead what I don't understand. But I do want to help. Just not alone. And with that, she signed. Then I did. Then our parents. And suddenly, the building I'd poured my soul into was mine again. Not as a favor. Not as a daughter. But as a rightful leader. That Monday, I walked back into Sanders' Build Company with a new badge, a new title, and the quiet confidence of someone who had survived the demolition. My door plaque no longer said Project Director. It read, Mary Sanders, Chief Operating Officer. I moved into a smaller office, closer to the real work. I didn't need to sit at the top floor. I needed to be where the hammer hit the nail. Savannah kept the third-floor conference room. She filled it with abstract chairs and daily playlists. I didn't care. As long as she did her job, she could run meetings in a treehouse for all I cared. And slowly, it worked. The clients came back. Carter and Sloan unfroze 2 contracts. Maxwell Carter personally shook my hand in our first new board meeting and said, "This is the Sanders Build Company." I signed up for. And that moment? That was when I knew I hadn't just survived the betrayal. I had outbuilt it. The weeks that followed felt like oxygen returning to lungs that had been underwater for too long. I didn't just reclaim my position, I reclaimed something deeper. Autonomy. Voice. Direction. My first act as COO was simple but symbolic. I eliminated mandatory after-hours work and less tied to emergencies. For years, I had worked through every dinner, every birthday, every rainstorm. But leadership wasn't about martyrdom. It was about building a place people didn't have to escape from at 5 p.m. And for the first time, I saw heads lift in the break room. Conversations didn't stop when I walked by, they started. People smiled again, without that hollow, performance-polite tone that had become standard when Savannah first arrived. Savannah, to her credit, adapted better than I expected. She launched a weekly internal podcast called Building from Within, where employees shared their personal stories, how they got into construction, why they stayed, what they wanted to change. It humanized the workforce in a way no memo ever could. The surprising part? It worked. Employee engagement jumped 14% in 2 months. One of our site leads, a grizzled guy named Herman who barely used email, started a mentorship circle for new hires. It wasn't part of any formal initiative. Just something he felt inspired to do. That was the ripple effect Savannah's approach created. And this time, it wasn't at the expense of the structure I had built. It complemented it. We weren't fighting for the steering wheel anymore. We were driving different sides of the same engine. But not everything healed easily. My father remained restrained. He'd show up 3 times a week in his new advisory role, pretending to adjust to the changes, though it was clear he hated not being in control. He'd scan documents with the same surgical eyes as before, mutter soft critiques no one asked for, and occasionally bark at interns like nothing had changed. Until the day of the investor meeting. Savannah and I had spent 2 weeks preparing a joint presentation for a 5-year roadmap. We arrived early, everything crisp, updated brand visuals, risk models, margin projections, contingency layers. She handled the storytelling. I handled the numbers. At 9:04 a.m., the meeting began. At 9:07, my father walked in unannounced. Late. And without even looking at us, he took the chair at the head of the table. Harold, our corporate advisor, glanced at me nervously. I said nothing. Just looked at my dad, then pointedly at the seat reserved for senior advisor. He got the message. Quietly, he moved. Savannah began the presentation. She spoke clearly, passionately, weaving client stories into our brand renewal strategy. When she passed the clicker to me, I walked them through the updated cost management protocols, scalable build schedules, and a proposal for expanding into middle-income community housing, an idea I'd pitched 3 years ago and was told too progressive for our brand. Now, it was being received with head nods and notepads flipping open. When the meeting ended, one of the board members, a former civil engineer turned investor named Julian, pulled me aside. You and your sister, he said, eyes twinkling. You've created something rare. Data with heart. Structure with soul. I nodded slowly. It's the foundation that holds. The rest can be designed in layers. He smiled. Your father built this company. But you've made it matter. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt still. Like a building that had finally finished settling. Later that evening, as I packed up, Savannah walked into my office holding 2 smoothies. Strawberry mango, she said, setting mine on the desk. No ice. Light sweet. I remembered. I looked at her. You're not trying to win points, are you? Nope, she said, sinking into the chair across from me. Just trying to say, thank you. For what? For not throwing me out. I leaned back. You still don't know what a zoning variance is. I'll learn, she said softly. I'm not trying to be you anymore. That got my attention. Is that what all this was? I asked. Trying to be me? She nodded slowly. You were always the golden one. Always so composed. I thought I had to come back and match you. But I couldn't. I didn't know how to lead. So I overcompensated. And Dad handed you the whole company, I muttered. I didn't ask for it, she whispered. But I didn't say no either. And that's on me. I studied her. Not the glossy exterior, the art kid turned boardroom novelty. But the tired eyes. The faltering voice. The realization that respect wasn't inherited. It had to be earned. You gave the shares back, I said. That matters more than you know. She smiled. They were never really mine, Mary. I just held them for a minute. You built this place. You kept it standing. I stared at my smoothie, the condensation slowly dripping onto my project schedule. Let's not waste any more time, I finally said. Let's build something we both believe in. That night, for the first time in a decade, I left the office before 6 p.m. I took the long way home. Rolled the windows down. Let the air carry the smell of summer dust and distant concrete. I wasn't chasing anything anymore. I was finally steering. And I wasn't alone. By the start of the next quarter, the foundation had settled, literally and figuratively. For the first time in years, I felt the company breathing like a living thing again. Our staff retention had improved. Clients were returning. And perhaps most surprisingly, the tension in the building had started to fade. But that didn't mean everything was perfect. You see, when you've spent years carrying something heavy, even after you put it down, your muscles still ache from the memory of the weight. And for me, that weight was my father. He still showed up. Still made notes in the margins of my reports. Still asked questions that felt less like curiosity and more like judgment. But he'd stopped trying to control things outright. Maybe because he knew he'd already lost that battle. Or maybe because part of him was learning, in slow painful inches, that he'd underestimated me. One Thursday afternoon, I found him standing in the break room, staring at the wall. The new wall. Savannah had commissioned a mural there, a collage of every project Sanders Build Company had completed over the past decade. But what stopped him cold was a single tile in the lower left corner. It was a sketch. My first eco-home design from when I was 14. He didn't say anything as I walked up behind him. I just stood there beside him for a moment. She found it in Mom's old files, I said. Thought it belonged. He didn't look at me. Just nodded, once. It was a good design. Ahead of its time. I could have let it hang there. Could have walked away satisfied. But something in me needed to ask. Why did you do it? He turned slowly. Do what? Cut me out. Sign over 75% to Savannah. Without telling me. His jaw tightened. He looked older than I remembered. I thought you'd be fine, he said. You were always strong. Always reliable. I figured you didn't need the title to stay. You were already running things. I blinked. So you punished me for being competent? No, he said. I took you for granted. Because I assumed you'd always be there. I didn't think about what it meant. About how it would feel to give everything to someone who hadn't earned it. I crossed my arms. You didn't just take something from me. You taught me that loyalty doesn't get rewarded. That working harder only makes people lean on you more, not thank you. He looked down. And I was wrong. About a lot of things. The silence that followed wasn't comfortable. But it wasn't hostile either. It was the kind of silence that forms when something begins to break, not from pressure, but from clarity. Eventually, he said, you've built something better than I ever could. And the truth is, I don't know if I would have lasted under the pressure you carried. I nodded. You're right. You wouldn't have. And with that, I left the room. I didn't need an apology anymore. I had built something stronger than his approval. I had built myself. Over the following weeks, Savannah and I settled into a rhythm. She led our City Builders campaign, a series of short films and articles spotlighting our construction teams, showing the human side of the work we did. The feedback was overwhelming. Not just from clients, from our own staff. It's funny how people work harder when they feel seen. Meanwhile, I focused on the logistics, tightening contracts, restructuring our procurement pipeline, and negotiating down material costs during inflationary spikes. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't poetic. But it kept us running, and running well. Then came the Knoxville deal. A federal grant had been released for community development in underserved areas, schools, libraries, youth centers. The kind of work that made you proud, not just paid. And for the first time in our company's history, we were invited to bid on it. But there was a catch. Westfield Developments, our biggest rival, was already circling the project. I sat across from Savannah in the third-floor conference room, documents spread out between us. They're bigger, she said. More connected. If they pitch the way they usually do, we might lose this. I leaned back. Then we don't pitch like we usually do. What do you mean? I looked at her, and for the first time since our battle for the company ended, I saw something new in her eyes, grit. We pitched together, I said. You lead the presentation. I lead the execution plan. One vision, two voices. Her eyebrows shot up. You want me to present? Yes, I said. Because if we win this, I want them to see that it wasn't just a fluke. That we're not just rebuilding Sanders Build Company, we're redefining it. She smiled. Give me 3 days. I nodded. I'll handle the risk analysis and margin breakdown. 3 days later, we stood in front of the federal grant board, a room full of suits, skeptics, and silent recorders. Savannah started with a story about one of our oldest foremen, Hector, who taught kids how to read blueprints in their community center during off hours. She connected architecture to legacy, structure to humanity. When I took the floor, I showed them the plan: cost-effective builds, community labor partnerships, sustainability without inflated budgets. I made it airtight. And when we were done, the board didn't just nod. They clapped. That night, we didn't go out to celebrate. We didn't need to. We just walked down the hallway of our office, past the mural, and sat on the floor like kids who'd finally built a fort strong enough to withstand the storm. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't just a comeback. It was a new beginning. The call came on a quiet Tuesday morning. Eleanor walked into my office holding the phone like it might burst into flames. It's them, she whispered. The grant board. I nodded once, took the call, and listened. My heart beat steadily, not because I wasn't nervous, but because I already knew. We're awarding the Knoxville contract to Sanders Build Company. The man on the other end said. It wasn't even close. I thanked him. Calmly. Professionally. But the moment the call ended, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for 10 years. We did it. A government contract worth over $30 million, across 3 states, building libraries, youth centers, and safe schools in underfunded districts. The kind of work that could change not just our company's bottom line, but people's lives. Savannah burst into my office seconds later. They said yes? I nodded. She let out a breathless laugh and collapsed into the chair across from me. We just beat Westfield, she said, half in shock. No, I said. We became better than them. That afternoon, we gathered our team in the main conference room. Not for a press release. Not for a memo. We told them face to face. There were cheers. Applause. Someone brought in cupcakes. Someone else brought champagne. Hector, the old foreman from Savannah's story, just nodded and said, "About time." But amidst the celebration, I stepped out onto the balcony, looking out over the site next door, our next project. Fresh dirt, steel rods, and morning light. A blank page. My father joined me a few minutes later, silent. "They told me what happened," he said, quietly. "Congratulations." I nodded. "It wasn't just me." "No," he said. "But it wouldn't have happened without you." I waited, but he didn't say more. That was fine. I didn't need fireworks. I just needed him to see it. "You know," he said, after a pause, "I used to think leadership meant being the one who made all the decisions. And now? Now I think it means knowing when to get out of the way." We stood there together for a while. Nothing more needed saying. By the next quarter, things had shifted in ways I hadn't expected. I no longer walked into rooms trying to prove myself. I didn't need to. Our results spoke for themselves. We opened a new Knoxville branch, hired 24 new team members across 2 states, and completed our first site 4 weeks ahead of schedule. The Department of Education sent us a thank you letter, handwritten. Savannah launched Season 2 of Building from Within, and Episode 1 featured a janitor who had worked with our crews for 17 years and had never missed a single day. It went viral. And me? I started boxing again. Picked up sketching in the evenings. I even reconnected with Logan, the Southgate engineer I once ghosted because I had a concrete leak to fix. This time, I didn't cancel our lunch. I turned off my phone instead. He smiled at me over coffee and said, "You look lighter." "I stopped carrying things that weren't mine," I replied. Savannah and I still argued sometimes. But now, it was about ideas. Direction. Not identity. Not worth. And when she pitched a new campaign to spotlight women in construction, I didn't hesitate. "Do it," I said. "And make it loud." At a board meeting months later, Harold leaned over and said, "What you've done here, Mary, it's legacy work. And it's not because of who your father was. It's because of who you became." I didn't reply. But that night, I wrote the words in my journal. Not because of who they were. Because of who I chose to be. I never thought I'd find peace in the same building that once erased me. But sometimes, peace isn't about silence. It's about clarity. Boundaries. Ownership. One Friday evening, long after the parking lot emptied, I stayed behind to finalize our next 5-year plan. Savannah walked in holding 2 smoothies. We hadn't broken the tradition. She set mine down and said, "Remember when you used to carry this company on your back?" I smirked. Now I carry it on a spreadsheet. She sat across from me. "You're the only person I know who made revenge look like a leadership strategy." "Because it wasn't revenge," I said. "It was reclamation." She tilted her head. "What's the difference?" "Revenge wants to hurt someone," I said. "Reclamation just wants to be whole." She stared at me for a long time. "I'm glad you didn't give up," she finally said. "I'm glad you gave back what wasn't yours," I replied. That Sunday, I went to my parents' house for dinner. The table was set, just like it used to be. Except this time, no one played roles. No one pretended nothing had happened. My mother passed me the bowl of mushrooms she always used to overcook, and for once, they were perfect. My father poured wine and said, "To daughters who know exactly what they deserve and fight for it." It wasn't a full circle moment. It was something better. A new circle. One I'd drawn myself. Months passed. And then came the final proof. An email. From Westfield Developments. Garrett Westfield himself. He wanted to meet. Not to poach me. To partner. "We want Sanders Build Company to lead a joint bid on the East Shore redevelopment project," he wrote. Frankly, your execution metrics make the rest of us look slow. I sent the email to Savannah. She replied, let's make them look even slower. I grinned. Because this wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about what happens when a woman who's been told to stay quiet finally speaks. And everyone listens. Loyalty is noble. But loyalty without boundaries becomes servitude. Mary learned the hard way that sometimes the only way to rise is to walk away from what no longer values you. She didn't burn bridges. She built new ones, with her own name etched into the foundation. So ask yourself, what part of your life have you been quietly holding up, hoping someone would notice? And if they never do, will you be brave enough to notice it yourself? Would you have done what Mary did? Or walked away entirely? Let us know in the comments. And remember, on Revenge Echoes, stories don't just end. They echo.